Death Valley, a national monument since 1933, is a place of contrasting extremes. It shows us many strange and striking aspects. At Badwater, for example, we're near the lowest spot in the Western Hemisphere, 282 feet below sea level. But the reflection is of Telescope Peak, which reaches over 11,000 feet. This can be a harsh and cruel place, as the earliest pioneers discovered. It's one of the hottest areas of the Earth. Summer temperatures of 120 degrees are common. Yet in winter, there are frequent snowstorms only a few thousand feet above the valley floor. Death Valley is the driest spot north of the equator, but there is water here in many places. There are even tiny fish in certain areas of the monument. And it actually does rain in Death Valley, sometimes quite heavily. When conditions are right, parts of the desert are transformed into a surprising garden of springtime wildflowers. For the first Anglo-Americans to see Death Valley, however, there were no flowers, no rain, and precious little water. They were a party of Easterners heading for the gold fields of the Sierra in 1849. They had already suffered terribly. 2 people had died. They paused at the eastern edge of the valley. William Manley, one of the leaders, wrote later, "Before us lay a splendid scene of grand desolation." The 49ers could find no way out of the valley to the west. They set up camp on the valley floor. Manley and another man made a heroic 200-mile trek on foot south to Los Angeles, bringing back food and pack animals to rescue their starving comrades. Another member of the group had died. As the survivors climbed out of this place of anguish and suffering, one woman is said to have looked back and murmured, "Goodbye, Death Valley." Manley Beacon, named for William Manley, points to the sky like nature's monument to his lost companions, and to all those who could go no farther, whose bones whitened under the desert sun and crumbled to dust. Today, the major center of visitor activities in Death Valley is at Furnace Creek. In its dramatic setting of desert and mountains, Furnace Creek Inn is a luxury hotel with all resort facilities. More modest accommodations and a variety of visitor services are also available. There are campgrounds nearby and at several other locations in the monument. The famous Borax Museum is located at Furnace Creek Ranch. Outdoor exhibits relate to early transportation and mining in the Death Valley area. The National Park Service Visitor Center and Museum are also at Furnace Creek. Here we're 190 feet below sea level. This is the place to start your tour of Death Valley. In addition to scheduled talks on natural and cultural history, there's a wide range of exhibits that tell the story of the monument. You can also get maps, literature, and information here. One of the best ways to get a good grasp of the shape and size of Death Valley is to drive up to Dante's View. Besides the glorious scenery, the elevation here, over a mile above the hot valley floor, often makes this a cool and pleasant excursion. Unlike many valleys, Death Valley was not carved by a river. Instead, it was created by massive fracturing of the Earth's crust. Over eons of time, huge crustal blocks began to tilt. The western edges were thrust upward, forging the Panamint Mountains. The opposite edges tilted downward, creating the valley. The mountains along the eastern side were formed from the up-tilted edges of adjacent blocks. During the ice ages, the valley floor was periodically covered by a huge lake. fed by the plentiful rainfall and by runoff from the mountains. Then, as the climate grew hotter and drier, the ancient lake, called Lake Manly by geologists, gradually dried up. Vast and dazzling salt flats were left in its place. Today, the salty pools at Badwater, now fed by springs, are small-scale reminders of Lake Manly. Death Valley's climate has remained spectacularly dry, partly because Pacific storms have to cross 4 separate mountain ranges before they get here, and by then they've lost most of their moisture. But the storms that do strike the ranges walling in the valley often shed a great deal of moisture here. Erosion has been wearing away at the mountains ever since they were first formed. Rain and melting snow are channeled into ravines. The waters grow to a flood. And in a headlong surge to lower elevations, the floods carry along gravel and even boulders. These act as powerful abrasives on the canyon walls. At the mouths of Death Valley's side canyons are alluvial fans, formed from the rubble that the floods have dropped as they slowed and spread out on reaching flatter ground. The Death Valley landscape is filled with curious and spectacular examples of the effects of erosion. There's even a natural bridge. Rainwater rushing downhill carved the opening and left the bridge spanning the canyon. When there's a better than average winter rainfall on the valley floor, the following spring sometimes brings a captivating display of wildflowers. Most visitors have their favorite spots in Death Valley. All would probably agree that Artists Drive is one of the most beautiful and most colorful areas in the monument. Artist's Palette presents an astonishing range of pastel colors splashed across the brown canyon walls. The eroded volcanic deposits here have been colored naturally by various mineral compounds. Greens come from decomposing mica, reds, pinks, and yellows from iron oxides. Like a real palette, the concentration of colors here seems to have provided pigments for the various tints seen in all parts of the valley. Golden Canyon provides a pleasant hike any time of day, but in late afternoon the siltstone walls all but glow with a vivid golden light. This crumbly yellowish rock was originally the beds of ancient lakes, older even than Lake Manly. Here, and in fact in all of the Death Valley landscape, each new storm alters the scenery a bit. At Zabriskie Point, located directly above Golden Canyon, water erosion has helped to create some astounding scenery. This is one of the monument's most famous and most dramatic views. On the western side of the valley in Mosaic Canyon, you can hike a narrow, curving passageway where the walls are smoother and harder than in Golden Canyon. The work of erosion proceeds somewhat slower here, but as long as rain falls on the slopes above, that work never stops. The name of the canyon comes from the natural mosaics that are seen in some sections of the walls. They've been polished by flowing water and gravel. If it seems strange to talk at length about continuous water erosion in a desert environment, newcomers find it stranger yet to discover water in any form in the Death Valley area. Saratoga Springs, at the southern tip of the monument, presents the extraordinary contrast of abundant water in an extremely arid setting. The shimmering ponds here provide welcome way stations for waterfowl on their seasonal migrations. In Death Valley, as in any hot and arid place, water means the difference between life and death, not only for wildlife, but for plants and humans as well. The Furnace Creek area is quite literally an oasis created by water that comes from springs in the nearby Funeral Mountains. Even the ponds in the golf course at Furnace Creek Ranch aren't simply ornamental. They too serve as stopovers for migrating birds. Irrigation makes possible the extensive date groves at Furnace Creek Ranch. Inevitably, the real curiosity, at least as far as water in Death Valley is concerned, is the water that occurs naturally in this unlikely place. And in this respect, like Saratoga Springs, Salt Creek is a major attraction. This is a stream that flows much of each year in the hottest and driest place in North America. The water is about as salty as the ocean. Salt Creek has still another attribute that makes it an exciting place to explore. This is one of several sites in the monument where a species of pupfish can be seen. These little 2-inch long creatures have slightly different characteristics in each place where they're found. Pupfish are the only fish surviving from the era thousands of years ago when there were large lakes and streams in this region. The pupfish have managed to adapt to the heat and salinity of the water here, and they are thriving. In addition to flowing water, a second natural force continues to shape the Death Valley landscape. As a small but eye-catching example, Mushroom Rock was carved partly by sand and gravel carried by the wind. On a far larger scale, and at an infinitely faster rate, the wind shapes and shifts the Death Valley sand dunes almost literally from day to day. Footprints made this afternoon are gone tomorrow. The dunes cover about 15 square miles. Although any substantial windstorm will reshape them to some extent, the dune field stays within fairly narrow limits. The grains of sand were produced by erosion in the mountains to the west and northwest of the dunes. The particles were carried on the wind and dropped here, where the landforms set up patterns of crosswinds and eddies. A number of plants have adapted to life in the dunes. They've developed extensive root systems that reach down to the groundwater beneath the surface. The roots of the mesquite bush, for example, may be as much as 50 to 60 feet long. Most visitors are curious about the ripples on some surfaces of the dunes. Smaller grains of sand are carried farther by the wind than large ones are. The large ones collect in shallow ridges, which eventually trap other grains, and the ridges become ripples. The erosive forces of wind and water, in combination with the Earth's forces of fracturing and upheaval, have produced many geological curiosities in Death Valley. In Striped Butte, for example, the layers of different colored sediments were originally horizontal. They've been crimped and tilted into a vertical position and then exposed by erosion. In the northernmost tip of the monument, there's evidence of relatively recent volcanic activity. Recent, that is, in geological terms. About 4,000 years ago, a column of molten rock rising up from deep in the earth came into contact with the water table above it. In an instant, the water flashed to steam, and there was an enormous explosion that blew off the overlying layers of rock. The blast created Ubahibi Crater. There are several other craters nearby that are smaller and older. Ubahibi and its companions have never erupted in a lava flow, but the entire area is covered with a thick layer of volcanic ash and cinders. With so little fertile soil and a climate that brings only about 2 inches of rain a year, it's almost miraculous that a great variety of plants has adapted to life in this challenging environment. A peculiar grouping of arrowweed plants near the sand dunes grows where the groundwater is located close to the surface. The place is called the Devil's Cornfield because from a distance, the plant clumps look like corn shocks. As for the devil part of the name, well, in an infernally hot place like Death Valley, the word does come to mind now and then. The Devil's Golf Course is such a satanic setting that nothing at all grows here. Few more sterile places can be imagined. The surface is so hard and irregular that walking is difficult. The rock-like surface formations are composed of crystals of table salt mixed with silt. They are the remains of a bed of an ancient lake that evaporated about 2,000 years ago. For visitors who want to get away from the busier areas and go off by themselves, and for those who have four-wheel drive vehicles, Death Valley offers some very special destinations. The side trip to the racetrack provides not only an adventurous drive, but a touch of mystery as well. The racetrack is an oval mudflat in the northwestern part of the monument. There was once an ancient lake here. For anyone who's looking for solitude, this place is heartily recommended. The mystery here concerns the famous moving rocks. There's no doubt whatever that the rocks move because they leave tracks on the mud surface. The strange part is that no one has ever seen them move, and no one's completely certain how it happens. Because the surface of the mudflat is extremely slippery when it's wet, geologists tend to believe that the rocks are pushed along it by gale-force gusts of wind. Ice may also be a factor. Scientists may demand answers to all questions, but for many of us, a definitive explanation isn't really necessary. The puzzle itself is what intrigues us. Another side trip, less remote than the racetrack and suitable at times for the family car, is Titus Canyon. This is a one-way gravel road that leaves the highway a few miles southwest of Beatty, Nevada. Leadfield, a ghost town on the Titus Canyon Road, is a reminder of a late spurt of mining activity during the 1920s. The whole thing was a hoax, however, and no lead ore was ever actually mined here. Not far away geographically, but from an era thousands of years distant in time, are some fine examples of prehistoric Indian rock art. Many of the designs have no meaning to us, but we can recognize the human stick figures and some of the animals. The drive through the narrowest stretches of Titus Canyon is spectacular enough to please the most demanding adventurer. The unfortunate ghost town of Leadfield gave only a hint of the most colorful and exciting era of all in the history of Death Valley. Not long after the 49ers passed through, other prospectors came in to search the Death Valley area itself for promising sites to mine. The pinyon, pine, and juniper forests of Wild Rose Canyon in the Panamints are the reason for the existence of some of the strangest relics from this early mining era. The Wild Rose charcoal kilns are here. After a lead and silver strike 25 miles to the west, outside the present monument, carbon and high heat were needed to extract metal from the ore. Burning charcoal produces both, but ordinary wood does not. The kilns were built in 1877 to manufacture charcoal from the wood supply here in Wild Rose. The 10 kilns are nearly but not exactly the same size. They average a little over 31 feet in diameter and about 25.5 feet in height. Inside, they still smell strongly of creosote and resin, two byproducts of charcoal making. Many visitors remark on the interior acoustics, which create odd echoes. The kilns are aligned in a sort of military formation. They rise from the canyon floor like a file of huge silvery ghosts, silent specters from a long-gone era. Borax was first reported in Death Valley in 1873. The mineral had been used for centuries as a cleaning agent, and a variety of industrial uses for it had developed. It's still essential today, and is even used in nuclear reactors. Large borax deposits were discovered, and the Harmony Borax Works was built in 1881 near Furnace Creek to refine the mineral. Despite the long haul to the nearest railhead at Mojave, 165 miles away, the operation succeeded. The first borax shipments were taken out in wagons pulled by teams of 8 mules. Clearly, bigger wagons and teams could haul larger, more profitable loads. In 1883, truly gigantic wagons pulled by teams of 20 mules were put into service. These wagons were astonishing things, in size, in the extraordinary work they did, and perhaps most of all, in the vivid image they've left in the public's mind. Today, an original 20-mule team wagon rig is on display at the Harmony Ruins. Each wagon was 16 feet long and 4 feet wide. The sides were 6 feet high. It weighed almost 4 tons, empty. The wagons were designed specifically to haul Death Valley borax. A full rig of 2 loaded wagons, including the 1,200-gallon water tank that brought up the rear, weighed 36.5 tons. Surprisingly, the 20-mule teams and their wagons were in service for only 5 years. A new source of borax was found near Mojave in a form that was much easier to process. Borax mining here came to an end, but the 20-mule team wagon lives on as a symbol of perseverance and ingenious adaptation, and even as a symbol of Death Valley itself. One of the earliest strikes of precious metal inside the present monument boundaries was at Chloride Cliff. There were actually 2 gold booms here, the second in the early 1900s when mining in the Death Valley region reached its peak. The Keen Wonder Mine was one of the richest of all the gold mines here. The first ore was found at the site in 1903, and the mine continued to make money for its investors for several years. The Keen had a unique tramway system that was used to send ore down the mountainside. and in doing so generated power for the ore crushers. The steam tractor Old Dinah, now on display near the gate to Furnace Creek Ranch, was bought to haul ore from the Keene mine to the railroad, but it soon broke down and was abandoned. Although the site of the town of Skidoo is now just an empty flat, a great gold strike was made nearby in 1906. It's been said that the town's delightful name gave rise to the once popular catchphrase, 23 Skidoo. But the reverse is more likely to be the case. There was no water at the Skidoo mines, so a 21-mile-long pipeline was built to bring it in from a spring on Telescope Peak. The route can still be seen on the opposite slopes. There are extensive remains of mine structures at Skidoo. This spectacular site high in the Peniments offers a splendid view of range on range of desert mountains and canyons. Of all the ghost towns in the West, Rhyolite, Nevada makes one of the strongest and eeriest impressions. In reality, Rhyolite is a ghost city. It may have begun life in 1905 as a collection of tents and huts like the other boom towns. But soon, 2- and 3-story buildings of stone and concrete were put up. Rhyolite was going to be a major metropolis. It was clearly built to last. Perhaps that's why it's a little disturbing to see it in ruins. It represented much higher expectations, far greater faith than the mining towns of shacks and shanties. But permanence isn't built on optimism alone. The mine at Rhyolite produced gold, but never enough gold. Investors lost millions. Cash disappeared. By 1908, the city, whose population had peaked at 10,000, was dying. Shortly, it was all over. The bank building, Rhyolite's pride and joy, stood on Golden Street. It proved to be the street of golden dreams. Mining continued in Death Valley through the 1920s. The Needle's Eye, a natural window in the rock in Echo Canyon, saw some of the last efforts. Part of the interest in visiting a ghost town comes from looking beyond the picturesque ruins, trying to glimpse the men who dug the mines and built the towns, the men who survived the rigors of this merciless country. Is it possible there are ghosts in these ghost towns? Could that gust of wind, that rustle of a pack rat, actually be an old Death Valley miner? Is he still digging here, cursing the heat, wiping the sweat from his eyes, and hoping against hope that the next swing of his pick will uncover the biggest strike ever made? Of all the relics from Death Valley's mining days of boom and busts, of all the monuments to men of free spirit and soaring dreams, by far the most extravagant and the most eccentric is located near the monument's northern boundary in Grapevine Canyon.
I'd like to welcome you to Scotty's Castle. My name is Judy, and I'll be your guide.
Scotty's Castle. It isn't a castle, and Death Valley Scotty never owned it. He often said he did, but that wasn't true. The eccentric story of Scotty's life and personality are an essential part of the history of the castle. Although this place is real, and much of Scotty's life as he told it was not. Walter Scott was born in Kentucky in 1872 and went west as a youth. He worked at ranching and mining and on the 20-mule team wagons at the Harmony Borax Works in Death Valley. For 12 years, he was a trick rider with Buffalo Bill's Wild West Exposition, but he spent his winters prospecting in Death Valley. He had fallen in love with this fierce and beautiful place. Under the pretext of finding a non-existent lost gold mine here, he conned an investor out of $1,500 and squandered it on flamboyant sprees in Los Angeles. In 1904, he met Albert Johnson, a wealthy businessman, and pressed him for a grub stake. Johnson agreed. The two men became friends, and for the rest of his life, Scotty lived in the spotlight on money borrowed from Johnson. The pair rode together all through Death Valley. Johnson's frail health improved, and he found here a new excitement in life. His wife Bessie sometimes accompanied them, and when Johnson proposed building a house here, Bessie wanted a suitable home for entertaining friends. The first buildings were begun in 1922. By 1924, Scotty had moved in, and the Johnsons were visiting. Johnson paid for the land and the castle, and he alone owned it until his death. The castle today is a major visitor attraction, as strange and magical as a desert mirage. The Great Hall was the social center of the castle, where Scotty regaled the Johnsons and their guests with his tales of high adventure. Work of enlarging and embellishing the castle continued for several years, and priceless furnishings and art objects were imported from Europe. Johnson's and Scotty's gun collection is on display here. Scotty's bedroom, very simply furnished, opens off the Great Hall. His trademark Stetson and red necktie are still seen on the wardrobe as if he had just hung them there himself. The entrance to the dining room is across the Great Hall. This room was used for formal banquets and also for meals when the Johnsons and Scotty were at home alone. The china was all custom-made and bears the crest of Death Valley Ranch, the castle's official name. Many of the pieces are of very distinctive designs. The kitchen is decorated in a Spanish provincial style. It's a showplace of exquisite tile work and gleaming copper pots. The console of the castle's great pipe organ is in the second-floor music room. Visitors are treated to a short concert, either by a player system or by a white-glove Park Service organist. Mrs. Johnson's bedroom is a bright, cheerful place. Her collection of Indian baskets is neatly arranged on the shelves above her bed. There's also a handy little hinged table that she could let down for her breakfast tray. Mr. Johnson's bed, with its unique reading lamp, is 7 feet long. He was a remarkably tall man and towered over Scotty. If one asks the questions, was Johnson taken in by Scotty's tall tales? Did this garrulous old fraud cheat his open-handed benefactor? The answer is no. Johnson was a shrewd man. He could readily afford to indulge Scotty's most extravagant whims. He himself explained the friendship best. "Scott repays me in laughs," he said. Johnson lost a fortune in the stock market crash of 1929. Work on the castle ended soon afterwards, although the Johnsons continued their visits. The unfinished swimming pool and the rusted equipment symbolized the end. By 1948, both Johnsons had died. The religious foundation to which Johnson left the castle was required to provide Scotty with a home here. He was always the jovial host, the superb storyteller, the likable rogue. He died in 1954 and was buried as he wanted to be on a hill overlooking his castle. His friends were long gone. Wherever they might be, as the Los Angeles Times said, they would all be glad to see him. The National Park Service acquired the property in 1970. All facts of original ownership and formal name aside, this honestly is Scotty's Castle. A winter storm that visitors see as a few sprinkles at Badwater may be a deluge a couple of thousand feet higher in the mountains. And only a little higher still, a good solid snowstorm may be in progress. Snow is seldom more than a temporary inconvenience in the nearby mountain passes. And on the valley floor, it provides an epic backdrop for stovepipe wells. This pleasant oasis is located near the sand dunes, and like Furnace Creek, it offers a variety of visitor facilities. A new snowfall at Rhyolite, on the other hand, seems to intensify the atmosphere of unreality. Images become blurred. One indistinct form merges with another. Specters from the past might linger here. Some of these shades, torn by tragedy, may be sighing mournfully with the winter's wind. Other luckier souls, the spirit of Scotty himself perhaps, still send their happy laughter echoing through the mountains. Comfortable in his castle, that cheery charlatan might even now be sitting with his circle of friends, waiting for the evening's organ concert to begin.